This episode of Super Pulp Science is brought to you by Blood Letters by GMB Kamichuk and Ariel Gordon. Blood Letters is an artifact from the future, a jumbled archive of robots, soldiers, dot matrix printouts, ID cards, propaganda posters, photos, maps, and letters. The human detritus offering hints that something has gone horribly wrong. Available where all books are sold.
Attention, citizens! It's time for Super Pulp Science.
This is Super Pulp Science, where we talk about how genre gets made. This is a special episode of Super Pulp Science where I have decided to hand my homework in twice. By the time you're listening to this, the announcements for our new graphic novel that I co-created with my co-conspirator, Jonathan Ball, and many others who we'll talk about on the podcast. Last Breeds will be out in the world, and the publisher of that book has sent me a number of media-friendly questions to answer. I don't like this sort of stuff, and so I've decided to pull Dr. Jonathan Ball into the podcast to ask me those questions so the content exists somewhere as an answer that I can then send to that publisher and hope that it's good enough.
And let me just add, in the interest of transparency, that I also don't like this kind of thing, Gregory, but I did exactly what they asked me to do.
It's true. Jonathan did exactly what was asked of him without any pouting or ball kicking. There was no problem at all. It's mostly me. It's my problem. It's nobody else's problem. If you love making this kind of content on social media, more power to you. I do not. So I'm going to do it this way.
But also, this is about how genre gets made, this podcast.
That's right.
And it's a nice opportunity in some ways to talk specifically about a real case study and how genre gets made. How did Last Breeds get made? So before we kind of get into some of the, particular questions, Gregory, can you talk a little bit about, one, what is Last Breeds, and two, what is your actual credit on Last Breeds in the sense of of course, you have done some of the artwork. There's a number of ads, kind of fake ads in the comic that you did, but also, so that's an obvious contribution. You also have, contribution as co-creator and like a story by. So what is a story by credit for people who don't know versus, say, a writing credit?
Yeah, so the real writer of Last Breeds we're talking to right now, that's Dr. Jonathan Ball. And the story by credit is when you have an idea for a story and you and your friends bandy about the basic plot points, figure out what the shape of the story will be, but you don't roll up your sleeves and actually set it down in the format that fits how it is being presented. So you'll see story by credits in film, you'll see them in novels, you'll see them on graphic novels and comics. A story by credit is when the elements of the plot are being hashed back and forth by sometimes a group of people. In this case, Matt Medney, Dr. Jonathan Ball, and Gregory Kamichuk all have a story by credit. But really, the creator of Last Breeds is Matt, who had this idea a number of years ago now, where he mentioned this story concept for an asshole Tarzan. And he just had this idea of this asshole Tarzan character in the future. And he threw it off in a conversation about another project that we were talking about. And it landed with me so much so that I started harassing Jonathan to say we should pitch him his own project back to him. I love this idea. These are the things that I would do with it. Let's find out what is the scope of that idea, and see if we can bring a project that wasn't our idea back to the guy whose idea it was, and then all work on it together.
And just to sort of throw in a little bit about how story by credits sometimes work. So what you're describing is 100% correct, but it's worth, I think, pointing out that a lot of times when you see a story by credit, say like in a movie or something, that person may have simply done the kind of thing you're talking about, like, oh, I got an idea. Here's the basic idea. They may never have come back and done anything to develop the story. Whereas, many did. Like you, me, and many were sitting in meetings coming up with a story. Here's how the issue should move. Here's like the big plot points. So when you see story by credits, in this case, we
At it,
all really were contributing to the story,
yeah,
but
at its
sometimes that's not
worst,
the case.
at its worst, the story by credit is something scrawled on a napkin,
Right.
and the person has enough name or clout behind it that their name can never be shaken loose of the project. Sometimes
Right.
that's how it works.
So here we all were really coming up with that story, but it isn't always the case. So it's worth just kind of noting that for people when they see the credit. It can mean a lot of different things.
Yeah. So Last Breeds is a story where just trying to think of how to pitch it without being too spoilerly, but also be interesting. Imagine a future where an ecological disaster means that almost all young people cannot live past puberty as a result of the poison food chain. And one character who has managed to keep himself separate from that food chain, and a number of animals separate from that food chain, is sort of living peacefully, air quotes over peacefully, in this ark-like structure when he is presented with the idea that he might be able to save humanity in a classic sci-fi trope of, I think I have the cure. Can you get me somewhere and we'll give it a shot? And what really attracted me to wanting to work on Last Breeds is I love the last moments of films like Old Yeller, where you just get gut punched with that feeling of, oh, no one wants the dog to die. And we'd be presented with this story arc where we could repeat that emotional, right? You could keep having this emotional where you could have your favorites of these animals, and then and it sounds very sinister, but actually what I loved about the notion was, if you are presented with any team up, if you're presented a comic book story and you see the team, you immediately visually pick your favorites, right? Well, now you've done that. You've been forced to do that in all these amazing illustrated pages by Scott Henderson. And nobody can draw animals like Scott can draw animals. It's incredible. And he's so good at bringing humanity to the human characters, but equally to those poor animals. And it is a very violent, very rocky road for our characters. And so being able to have the audience play favorites and then play with those emotions along the story, like, really, that's what excited me about it, is that we'd be able to try something we hadn't done before, with an artist who is, I think, as good as anyone working for either of the big twos right now, and give him a chance to do some really wild storytelling.
Now, can you talk a bit more about the fact that Scott is doing the art and just the visual style? Because not just it's Scott's. So one, you're not drawing this book other than the pages you did draw.
Yeah. So the way we worked it out was, I would work we would work on the story together, and then I would art direct the illustrations, which would allow me to do some insert in-world advertisements from that future world, which is something I love doing anyway. And then also art direct the colors and the lettering. Although our letterer, longtime listeners to the podcast will know Lyndon, he doesn't need much direction. We mostly get out of his way these days.
Let's quit eating with that nasty old pup.
Well, he's hungry too.
So another credit you kind of have in here is like as the kind of art director of it. And so yes, you're contributing your own art in the cases, but the majority of the art's being done by Scott Henderson.
Yeah, we tried out a couple of different artists for the project, and but Scott, frankly, was just perfect for it. And Scott is, if you are looking up Scott Henderson's work, Scott B. Henderson, you will find a lot of work that he's done for High Water Press. I don't know how many graphic novels at this point, but dozens.
I'm not sure. He's been Eisner nominated as an artist.
Yeah, for Blanket of Butterflies, I think is the one. But he is often doing these really precise, specific historical dramas or recreations of lived experiences where the precision of his illustration is brought into focus because he can render things as they really were. I wanted to let him off the leash of reality and present him with a storyline where I saw that he could do action like we haven't seen him do before. He could do character design like he has not been able to do. And there are so many little things in the artwork,
Yeah.
motifs and elements that repeat and call back to each other. It's the kind of project where if I could have illustrated it myself, if I had time in the schedule to do it, it would have been worse for my involvement. It's better for Scott's involvement because he can do so many more things like that. And with an ensemble cast where you really do have to fall in love with everyone along the way, like, it's incredible.
And can you talk a bit more about the visual style that you, again, as an art director, you were very integral in not just, like, like, not just one picking Scott, which was, really your push. Didn't take any real convincing, but it was nevertheless, kind of your idea. Like, hey, I'm not going to draw this. Let's get Scott to draw it. But also, we ended up finding Zach Schuster as a colorist. And after, trying different things with the colors, the color visual style is very distinct. And it's something that you had kind of pioneered.
I pushed
You and
for it.
Matt were both sort of at one point, I forget which one you came up with the idea, but you guys really clicked on it early on. I didn't click with it.
I remember you saying, and I quote, "It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but if you guys like it, I guess that's okay."
Yeah, and eventually I figured out what you were talking about. But can you kind of so eventually I got it, but can you just talk a bit about that visual style and sort of how you and Matt and in collaboration with others, eventually getting to Zach, um, started to kind of really figure out how this color treatment is going to work and how it's going to
Yeah,
the
so
visuals and so on.
anything that is non-traditional related to how Last Breeds is assembled is ultimately my fault. The idea I had was I have seen so much of Scott's work in the realm of reality, where if someone's wearing, leather, it's brown, the grass is green, the sky is blue, things reflect, everything is a version of reality. And I wanted, rather than to have realism, to have kind of an impressionist feeling in the colors so that the colors would represent and be coded to the emotional beats of the story. So we went with this green and red color palette that punches back and forth between these two colors unapologetically, where we're not looking at the colors of the real world. We're looking at the colors of the emotional landscape of the story throughout the story. And, I don't think it's telling a tale out of school to say that when we were first testing it out, not everyone on the team was totally on board with it. But then a couple of the emotional beats hit so much more powerfully as a result of those color choices, that as we got past 20 pages into 40 pages into 60, 80, 100, you get pulled into that world. And it is a little bit jarring if you are used to traditional comics. And what I'm hoping, since we're talking about this before it's been released, what I'm hoping is people will see Scott's line work in that traditional sense. It's easy, it's clear, there is nothing to interpret. If he's drawn it, it's really there. And the colors are the only place where you can have that sort of separation.
Yeah, I gotta admit again, like when you guys are first when you first brought it up, or Matt really immediately saw what you're talking about and was like, "Yes, let's do that." And I was like, "I don't really get what you guys are talking about, but fine, I'm not the visual guy I'm more the words guy." But then you started showing me tests, and again, like you had tests out different people before we ended up with Zach.
Yeah, I did a bunch of tests
Or
myself.
by
I
the
showed it
way,
to other
but
people.
it just didn't really click for whatever reason. And again, for me, it wasn't clicking. And I'd be looking at it, I'm like, yeah, I know, I guess. And you'd say like, yes, I know it's not working yet, but it will work. And I was like, if you say so, Gregory. But eventually it clicked for me. But even then, I was like, once it clicked and we got Zach, and then even I think you went through a couple iterations to get Zach dialed in. But once it kind of all worked and clicked, even then I was like, okay, I get it. It works for me. It clicks for me. But will other people get it? Will other people click it? But then I got to admit, like when I show it to people, we were very lucky to have Scott Snyder look at it and give us a blurb for the book and so on. And I gotta say, like, he was one of the people, but not the only person who, from like in terms of comics professionals, where I showed it to them, and like immediately the first thing they said was, "Those colors are great. Love this color scheme. Art's amazing. Like without even reading it, you can tell these things." So like that really put my mind at ease. That every time I showed it to a comics pro, they were like, "Love this approach." And I was like, "Oh, really?" Because I was worried no one would love this approach.
Well, my feelings are usually when I'm working on any project is that if we're just trying to do what we already did,
Yeah.
what's the point? So we had access to this incredible illustrator. We had access to um, really a control of the means of production through Gungnir and Matt. And we were able to make some choices that were purely creative. Um, well, then we have to. We have to make some purely creative choices, not responding simply to the market. Now, will that come back to bite us? We're about to find out. But a number of people who work as editors in Marvel and DC have seen the work, and same thing. My most quoted feedback is, um, "I'm going to steal this." Right? Like,
Yeah.
I like how this
Yeah.
looks. This is something we should steal. So that's how I think I know that it will connect at least with the audience too. It never gets in the way of the storytelling, and it's always part of the clarity in the storytelling. So
So aside from this visual style, or maybe even just talking a bit more about the visual style, but what are some of the things you think sets this Last Breeds book apart from other graphic novels that are out there now for you?
for me, that it's literally a single story. It's not promising. Obviously, if it sold really well, we have this notion that we could do a follow-up, but we haven't written it. We don't have an idea. We've just agreed that we had enough fun working on it that we could do more. What we
I've got
try,
some ideas, but they just have come out of like what characters I like,
yeah. But
kind of thing.
what I think one of the things that sets it apart is that it's a story that has a beginning, middle, and end within its own volume. It has a
Right.
complete emotional arc inside of the one volume. The art is consistent through the entire volume, and the coloring is consistent through the entire volume, something you're not getting in a lot of mainstream comics right now. Um, uh, the notable exceptions are very notable. Like they stand out as being exceptional. So I don't mean that for any shade, but the thing that I think also makes it stand out is that the elements that feel like tropes you've seen before, dear listener, we know that's how they feel. And I promise you, once you get into the story, we have the appropriate number of rug pulls along the way to add something new to some of these science fiction tropes.
What's your favorite? Speaking of the artwork a bit more, what's your favorite piece of the artwork from the book, and why does it stand out for you?
So, both in Zach and in Scott's case, they received some pretty heavy art direction at the beginning, and then they just honestly kept getting stronger and stronger, so there was less and less influence necessary for me. And one of the things that really I adore in is not a single moment, but anytime we had a side character, there's a fair number of casualties in our story on all sides, both good and evil in our storyline. And there is not a single character who seems thrown away in their design. And that comes 100% down to Scott. I would say, oh, well, this, guy in the background, he's only going to be in there for 2 panels, whatever you got to do. Don't overdraw it if you don't want to. I kept trying to talk him back from the ledge of, 25 hours on a page. And these characters, their clothing is consistent, their style is consistent, the kind of jewelry they have or hairstyles, you can tell by region. As we move from region to region, those things change in the background, and the people that are being represented are different in each case. And that I would love to take credit for. You get given credit for that as an art director. I'd like to go on record as saying that was purely Scott not listening to my direction when I said, you don't have to put in that much time on these characters. You don't have to design them so heavily. And he said, well, if I'm going to be a stakeholder in this project, which he is, which is also different about this book, is that everyone involved gets a share. Then I want to do my best. And so this is my best.
What happened? It was so sudden I don't hardly know. The wolf came leaping out at us.
Lucky you had old Yeller.
One of the things that I always think about is like every time I write something and I like hand it off to an artist, it's always interesting like how it comes back. And what I started to do, I felt kind of bad about it because it's almost the opposite of what you're doing. You're like walking Scott back from the ledge, like, Scott, it doesn't have to be this crazy detailed thing. And I would write in the script stuff like, that it should look like, and then I would say something impossible and crazy.
Yeah, but he'd deliver it.
But it'd be like almost a vibe. Like it should look like it's, some sort of crazy science fiction thing from the 50s, but, super modern instead.
Contradiction.
Right. And then like leave it to Scott to figure out what it actually visually looks like.
Well, if I may be so bold, I never sent up the chain of our working relationship to the story level any of the problems that came from those kinds of descriptions. I just helped
But
work them
you
out.
know what? Though, in my own defense, whenever I did something like, so I did some more precise ones, but whenever I did that kind of thing, you got to admit that it works. It's a good direction. They work with it. Maybe
What-
don't like it.
We'll get Scott on here to
That's
talk
Scott,
about it at
but-
some point, but I will say, not speaking for him, but speaking about the work I've seen him do, once he established certain rules of how the world functioned, they're consistent throughout. And so if this, then that is really obvious in his workflow. And what's really in stark contrast in the storyline is we go through a pretty barbaric collapsed America, and then we arrive in a couple of instances at some polished technology. And usually someone who can do one can't do both so
Yeah.
well.
Or yeah, if you can draw bears, can you draw robots?
Yeah.
But he can absolutely draw them both
Yeah.
amazingly well. Those robots, later on, there's these kind of large guardian robots. And that was one where, in particular, I was kind of felt like I was really leaving certain things vague on purpose while making other things real precise. And, he just knocks that stuff like that out of the park, I find like a guy like Scott, if you give them enough, they can just go crazy with it. But you got to give them enough, like you got to give them enough to anchor in that they can go crazy. Other people, you got to handhold a bit more. He's not like that.
So I'm going to counterpoint you for a second. The art direction obviously was secondary always to the script. We would figure out the story, the three of us, and then Jonathan, you ran away to do the actual script breakdowns. And what I found really exciting about that is how an idea can happen in the beats. Like, by the middle of the story, we're going to have this action beat, and by here, we're going to have this, and this little mystery revealed has to be hung together with proper character-driven narratives. I'd be interested to know what you did to separate out all of our wild ideas and get the story down to these such tight moments.
This is actually a really good point that brings Scott in. And to give Scott a bit more credit, one of the things I do in a script when I put it together, and this is something I sort of learned from, I kind of learned this from you in just conversation with you about like what is important, what isn't important in making comics, and how is comics different from other mediums and things like this. So one of the things I took away from you and me having conversations just about comics over the years was the primacy of just emotional moments, and how other things sort of are subservient to that. And for you, it's even like how reality itself is on a certain level. It doesn't need to look realistic. It just has to vibe right. Or like your style is a very non-realistic, illustrative of the emotion or the feeling or whatever. I think of your work as very surrealistically influenced in that way, a very, Lynchian, you me kind of connect in those influences in some respects. Scott's not that kind of artist, but so for me, like bringing that primacy of the emotional or the poetic logic into it, especially if you're having a story that's more kind of grounded in science fiction or realism on a certain weird level. How I reflect that in the script is I will number the emotional beats. Like I'll have like I'll give myself sort of rules about like this page is about this on an emotional level, and then also on a story level, this is the page where this thing happens. But then I'll also like when I won't give like a panel breakdown, but I'll number the beats. So like my script will be like 1, but it won't say like what shape that panel is. It won't even say that it is a panel.
It's good that it doesn't, because
So let's say like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like there's 3 beats on this page, or there's 4 beats on this page, or there's 5 beats on this page. So like if there's 5, maybe Scott draws 5 panels. Maybe he draws 6 or 7 because he's going to take one of my beats and spread it across 2 just because there's an action taking place. It's like I will describe the actions in terms of like in the rules I've learned, which is like 1 verb per panel. But I'll kind of number the so I'm like numbering it in terms of how I think it should look and how I think the pace should work visually or could work. But what's more important to me is the emotional aspect of it. So to me, like when I hand off a script page like that, it's kind of numbered out where I've given you like you could draw that, but you could also pace it a little bit differently if you think it's a better action flow. You could like, but you've got the emotional beats. So Scott's the one who's taking that script and deciding how many panels it really is.
and
Scott's the one who's deciding which panels are big and which are small and how they fit on the page. I'm not saying that in the script, which some writers do.
So one thing that Scott excelled at in Last Breeds, and if you pick up a copy of this book, dear listener, I want you to look for how many glances are occurring. Like, just imagine, if you will, for a moment, that it's your task to draw a glance. Like a person just shifting their eyes in a micro expression just for a second that is counter to what the rest of the frame is trying to establish. He has all of these amazing moments where the emotion that the character is feeling is actually visible on their face in a way that is subtle. And that is so, as a person who also draws comics for a living, that is so hard to do. Like,
Yeah, and here's where it maybe gets even harder is although in some ways easier. Like, so again, I defend this method of writing. I'm not trying to suggest it's a bad way of writing. Let me defend it by saying, but like, say I want it, in my head, I might think, okay, in this moment, emotionally, we need this person to react to what the other person says. So maybe somebody says something, and then Celia hates it. Like if that's the emotional beat, I'll write Celia hates it. I won't write like Celia looks at him sidelong or anything like that. I'll leave it to someone like Scott to interpret. Well, what does that mean visually in her body or in her face? So that's all that acting is his. But the core of that is in the script, so it does really require, I was really impressed, one, that Scott was able to do it. Not that I knew he could do it from seeing his past work, but you still don't know. Like I knew he technically could draw characters that had that level of acting or was a great illustrator and artist. But what you don't know, having never worked with the person, is you don't know, can they take your script and translate it in that way? Like, is your writing style going to work across that? And once in a while, he'd come back and want more clarification on something. But for the most part, he's not just giving me what I wanted or visualized, but knocking it out of the park. And there's a couple instances where I might have laid a panel breakdown. Like there's one 9-panel grid where I told him like it's 9 panels, it goes in this way, repeat this one here. But for the most part, like I'm not doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, and those kinds of direction were so few and far between that there was nothing to really negotiate for. So, dear listener, if you're managing an artist who is very skilled and is putting in a huge amount of labor, you also have to know that revisions are poison to your project, right? And so you can't ask for lots of revisions, or that is all the energy and effort of your artist disappearing into the wind. And if you want them to reach for something new, you have to be encouraging them by saying, oh, that's not what I asked for on that page, but I love it. Where is that going to go? And again, just speaking for how the pages came in when we didn't pull back on the reins for background character descriptions or descriptive elements. They just started coming more faster and more furious, and the world started getting more alive as a result of things we weren't asking him to do. And that's where the real magic of comics is. It's easy to write comics. It's really hard to draw them.
No wolf in his right mind would have jumped us at the fire. Not even a loafer wolf. That wolf was mad.
I credit you completely for my attitude on that because I remember a different project with a different artist, but I did this book called Dirk Dirksen versus Stevens from Mars with Stephen Call. And I remember, so first we did an 8-page short. And I remember Lyndon, when at one point I hadn't worked with Stephen before, but Lyndon had worked with him extensively. And so I'd given Stephen a script, it comes back with all these storyboards, like he sketched out pages and he's showing them to me. And I kind of backshot Lyndon and I said, what am I supposed to do with these? I thought I'm like, and he's like, well, you're supposed to let him know, is this going to work? I'm like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, well, he's the one who is the artist. Why would he ask my opinion about the art? I'm like, so I was just like, yeah, it looks great. I mean, trying to be nice, but it's I couldn't possibly imagine the idea that you would want me to tell you how.
Mm-hmm. And I think it
and the process, I got it in retrospect. I was like, oh, I see the logic of doing this now, because Lennon explained to me oh, well, he's making sure that this is reflecting, because you haven't worked before. This is going to reflect what you're thinking.
It's pretty common for people to submit thumbnails,
but I never working with you
Right.
prior to that was the only person I worked with. It's you're not even going to draw you're not going to draw anything that I tell you to draw. Steven's kind of drawing pretty much what I told him to draw.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm like,
So the difference here being,
and
the main difference
crazier
is if you have worked on thousands of pages of comics before, by all means ask your artist for thumbnails, because you have some lived experience in order to draw upon to make some suggestions. If you're newer to the comics field, you're probably in their way.
That's how I felt. I was like, you, Steven, you tell me what it should look like. No, I don't know anything. You know way more than I do about comics.
That's right. And then it's also about knowing what your collaborator wants.
Right.
When we're working on Eye Collector, I wanted the freedom to overly interpret what is a dream-like reality. So I don't want constraint. You can't tell me what a dream is supposed to look like. But
Right.
it's very easy to tell a person what a collapsed America is supposed to look like, because there's a cause and effect in our story. And so we have to talk about what.
Yeah. And so sometimes he would have a question about well, should this be this or that or the other thing? And so, for the most part, he didn't need that kind of instruction. But when he had the questions, it made a lot of sense why he's asking that particular question. It was clearly always an oversight on my part. Is there a scene that you really like, or think is just one of the scenes that stands out for you?
That stands out in Last Breed?
Yeah.
Yes. And I have to give you credit for it. There is, because it didn't show up in our story breakdowns, it just showed up at the lettering page. It showed up on the page when I finally saw it. And there is a moment in Last Breeds where one of the animals who has connected very powerfully with one of our main characters is killed, skinned, and presented to that character as something they can wear going forward on the adventure, like a waste not, want not kind of moment. And that was kind of how we arranged it, was this character would not just let the carcass molder or bury it. It would be waste not, want not. They'd use the meat, they'd use the skin, they would carry on that way. And instead of it having that feeling, it had this complete emotional connection where suddenly, for the first time, I was like, oh, that character, our stoic, monstrous warrior character, has a heart, has feelings. And it was just putting a single line into their mouth, as you put it, to fill the negative space of the panel. But it's so much more than that. So that is one of those moments where it really felt like the magic of comics, where everybody's job, from story to writing to pencils to inks to letters to colors, all came together and made this one thing that separately would never have arrived that way.
I was really pleased with those sorts of uh, parts of the process because it was a way where I felt like you, me, and Matt were especially vibing because we would have I forget the exact. I know what you're talking about, and I remember the process of it kind of was I had written the script, Scott had drawn it up, Lennon had lettered it, it all was looking good. And then, when we were kind of going over things again, Matt had pointed out, he's like, it just feels like there should be a word here. Matt had given me at one point a bunch of notes that I thought were just great because he was like, there should be a word here, They were not telling me what word.
Yeah.
And I was like, he's so right. For pace, there needs to be something here. Visually, it looks empty a little bit, not just because of Scott has left space for there to be words, but there's no words. And so, then it's like a great opportunity to come in and kind of add something more to the scene.
And on iCollector, you had learned or had a pace of underwriting. You would leave out. You would always pare
Yes.
down what you were writing. So whatever we had agreed would be on the page. Eventually, you would rewrite it, and it would be usually half as much. So I think you were in that.
Frustrated because I'd have him letter all the stuff, then I'd take him out.
That's right.
Then he'd also
Oh,
end up,
big eye roll from
he'd end up with no
Lyndon.
letters at the end of the day or something.
That's right. Yeah.
But he'd have to letter it first. We had him letter blank panels and what.
Oh, I stand by that.
I stand by it too, but sometimes you don't know if that process is going to work, and every book has a different process. I find, but anyway, I appreciate moments like that where the whole team kind of starts to gel in a weird sort of way because of the process, and it makes you really appreciate not just your collaborators but also that collaborative process, and how you can get to a thing that's better than it might have been on your own.
One of the reasons why I knew we had done the right thing by pulling a big team in on this book is that I illustrated an alternate cover for it. So part of the print run will have a cover I did, and it is the most nightmarish. I was showing it to a few people, and they said, "Oh, I didn't know that this book is so dark and grim and all of these things." Because I basically have like an orchestra of bones essentially arranged on the cover of my version. And it isn't. There's so much heart in the book that my art style would not have worked to carry it on. Yeah.
Is there a feeling on that kind of sense of like the feeling that kind of the cover gives you or the book has? Is there a particular message or feeling you want a reader to kind of walk away from after finishing the book?
Dystopian literature at its best actually leaves you with hope, I think, and not despair. And even though there are a lot of horrible things that happen along the way in Last Breeds, I think that the final moments, even though they're quite sad and quite grim, really are more realistic than the end of most dystopian things I've seen in comics. Again, like, the feeling I hope people will walk away with is we are mishandling some things in the world now. All science fiction is about now. It's not about the future. We're mishandling some things. We have immense technology at our disposal. We have enormous imagination that we are not using properly. And it is put us on a trajectory of potential disaster. But there are people who are really trying to do the right thing, and that's all they want to do is the right thing for everybody. So hopefully it asks more questions than it answers. That's kind of what I think science fiction is best at also.
Is there a character you like the best or you relate to the most in some way?
Every chapter I fall in love with the animal that we're about to destroy.
That's by design, my friend, by design. I started to feel bad because at one point I made a list of the animals that should be in this one panel in the first. At the end of the first chapter, there's you see a bunch of the animals, and I remember really specifically being like, "Okay, Scott, here's the list of the animals, and then those are the only animals you're allowed to draw from this point on, because I don't want some." Guy coming to me saying, "Well, there were really 3 tigers,
Right? Yeah.
or 2 tigers, but then you killed one or whatever." I'm just making up numbers, but I didn't want there to be like a magic animal that came out
That
of
came out of
nowhere.
nowhere,
It was
yeah.
never.
Yeah, you kept pretty careful track. It's Noah's Ark meets the Road Warrior, kind of,
Yeah, kind of. That's funny.
is what Last Breeds kind of it feels like. And if you are an illustrator out there, you know that you don't want to draw one horse and one bear, let alone 12 or 15 different animals every issue. You don't want to do it. And not once ever does Scott complain about the animals he was drawing. Occasionally he would complain about the technology, like how advanced is this technology? We should really figure it out and let me send you some drawings. But never was like, oh, I can't figure out how to draw a condor, a chimpanzee, a mandrill, and a, tiger. He would turn those in and there was never any complaints.
There's no hope for him now, Travis. He's suffering. You know we've got to do it.
I know, Mama. He was my dog. I'll do it.
I also feel like, I don't know if he appreciated this or not, but I remember feeling like, okay, let's just establish early on what animals there are. And then, once, if that one animal dies, you don't have to draw it again. I'm not going to have a second one come up from behind the bush, you know, kind of thing. Did you, speaking of kind of, it's challenging to draw animals for most people. Never mind an animal with an emotion.
If you're asking,
action,
did I
so on.
get a note from him saying, can you please kill animal X next issue? No, never once.
No. My question is sort of like, what are some of the challenges, unexpected challenges, or just kind of funny moments during the creation of this for you, or things that stand out in terms of like moments that actually kind of flag for you as like this was harder than I thought it was going to be, or even just like more fun or funny than you thought it would be.
For me, the stuff that stands out as being like a couple of things stand out in the creation of the project. Number one are the trouble of the colors, figuring out, getting everyone on board for what was a vision I was allowed to direct. And then also having to be the person that would say to other members of the team, no, they didn't do it wrong. They did it exactly the way I asked them to do. It's not their fault. It's my fault. They're doing exactly what I've asked them to do for this moment or that moment. And people assuming that you or Matt or Scott or Zach or somebody else was the responsible party and confiding in me that they didn't like it and then having to say, no, that's my decision. That's my fault. We're sticking with it. That's how it's going to go. So for good or ill, that's something that stands out in the production line as being funny. For me, the thing that stands out in the overall layout of the book is we produced it as if we were making monthly comics.
Yeah.
We produced it the same way that you would if you were working monthly, but our plan all along was to do it as a collection. And so what that created for us was chapters that felt like complete issues, where if you read it out of context, it would still hold together like a story. And I think that turned into a real strength. An accidental strength of the project is the way we were working is we would sort of be, at the best 2 scripts ahead.
I don't think it's accidental. I mean, I was very much planning for that because the way I always think of stories in comics, for whatever, for no good reason, by the way, I always think of Shakespeare plays and how they're structured. Shakespeare has 5 acts. The acts have a real precise structure. They're really coherent and cohesive. They really are different from one another, sometimes in a real particular self-contained ways. I like that 5-act structure more than I like, what sometimes gets talked about as like a 3-act structure or whatever.
I prefer it also. It's partially why we decided on a 5-chapter breakdown.
Yeah, I gravitate towards it, I think, because of Shakespeare, perhaps. I don't know, but I like the coherence of the issue as a unit too. Like,
each issue had a 5-act structure also in the writing, even if that wasn't always how our beats came out in the story. When it came down to finally scripting it, there would be those really distinct moments where, I'd be like, oh, there's a twist here I didn't see coming that would show up in the dialogue.
And to me, it's kind of like a sonnet. You want it to fit in 14 lines. You kind of want a comic to fit in 22 pages. Now, if you had some that were longer, because you break it when it works to break it. But I like having that as a container. Because to me, I'm literally like, I'm laying out cue cards. I put out 22 of them, and as if I was looking at an issue and spreads. Again, I'm going to map out like the big from our story talks. I'll like lay out, okay, well, this story beats here, this story beats here. I got one in the middle. I'll put something here, like to me, like writing is very structural in that way. And that's one of the things I like about a project like this is like I get to kind of do my thing and in a way that leaves space for other people to do their thing. And then I can come back and layer onto it later. So I get to kind of be at the start and at the end as a writer in comics, in just that medium.
Letterer Lyndon,
I love it anyway, but
Also-
it can cause problem for other people.
podcast producer, is lurking at the edges,
Yeah,
waiting to
that's
have a
nuts.
comment. He has something to say.
There's also the letter on this book. We should
Yeah.
know it.
How's our list of questions going? How are you doing?
I'm answering some of them. We're almost done. I'm gonna ask him one more because I'm not gonna ask him all of them. But the last question I have is simply, is there a particular hidden detail or some Easter eggs that you think people should be kind of eyeing up for, or that you were really proud to find in there?
I think I've belabored it a little bit with the way Scott has baked in so much world building. But my favorite little hidden detail is not that hidden. It is the poster for Everything Wrong with sequelization culture, where there is a reference to Lassie X, this cyborg Lassie movie, in a burned out, I didn't even mean that the way it came up, but the burned out Los Angeles that we're going through. Something that I think bears putting on record here is Matt for keeping his eye on the prize, for getting this book finished and together and out to the printer while his literal city was on fire. We were having one meeting and he was showing us like, oh, here I am, just like
One block
one
away
block from the evacuation zone. So guys, I may have to cut this meeting short. And yes, I have people staying. There's people in the background because their houses are gone and now they're living with me. So like the idea that with everything else going on, this book got made is, I think, a testament to people just really loving comics on this project.
Well, that has been Super Pulp Science, where we talked about.
No.
No.
I've been
Have you
sitting here.
questions?
Yeah,
no,
yeah. That's why I brought the mic over. I've
I
been
thought you
sitting.
were saying we were running.
I
out of
was
time.
listening for the last 10 minutes of this show, and decided I wanted to ask Gregory some questions that aren't on the approved media
Oh, I
question
can't wait.
list.
Yeah, no, I'm done these questions.
Yeah.
Gregory,
Yes.
do you think Bale was right?
Well, no one's read the book now, so
That's
we
fine.
can't really
You can still ask
go
the
too
question.
far
You
into
can
it.
come back to it.
Do
Read
I
the book
think
and
Bale was right? So here is the essential non-spoiler element, is that when someone sees that society is going completely the wrong way, they decide to isolate themselves from that society, live on their own, under their own auspices. Do I think he's right? No. I actually think our main character of the story is a wonderful villain the entire time. And he is the appropriate tool to wield across a collapsed America, and the other characters wield him as such. He kind of becomes the figurehead because he's the physically most imposing.
The most marketable
He's
character.
the most
in the book.
marketable character on the book, but
Yeah.
he's actually a tool being, in my mind, when I read it, separate from someone who had a thought about what it's about. I read it recently just for fun, and I realized, oh, he is a danger to himself and others most of the time through this story, which was not by our original design, but I can definitely see it.
in
being
some ways,
something.
he's kind of starts to learn certain lessons. My character that I kind of feel like is technically placed in the villain antagonist role after a certain point, but in my mind, kind of became its hidden hero is the Diane or the Sow.
Yeah.
Who sort of like, I feel like I'm really proud of how that character was introduced.
She developed totally naturally, separate from our storyline, as a need to have balance for our
For Bale,
on
because
unstoppable
of these
force.
things you're
Yeah.
talking about,
Yeah.
and and to provide kind of a thematic counterpoint to get some of those ideas out. I was really proud about how that sort of character started to develop, and we started to, therefore, when you have characters that have oppositional ideas in that way, one of the things that allows you to do in a story is start to actually get a philosophical kind of thematic debate between ideas. And then you can have questions like your question start to come to the reader. Otherwise, it doesn't happen,
Another thing I didn't think would show up in the story that surfaced upon a reading after is the subtitle of our story, The Problem with Billionaires. Is that just really, it's our story points at tech billionaires and the lack of oversight related to them. And we worked on this, we started it 2 years ago, long before any inaugurations, let's just say.
Long before Doge.
Yes, long before any of that. And suddenly I'm reading it thinking, oh no.
What is the age of your target audience?
That's a great question. Comics are so weird.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's an odd.
Comics are so weird. I think like fans of the new Predator series that Ed Bryson's doing would dig this book totally, even if
What
they only came
age
for No, I'm getting there. I'm getting
Target
there.
audience.
So Marvel would suggest to you that their target audience is anywhere between the age of 15 and 35.
Sure.
Right? And so I'd have to say ours is too. I don't think there's anything unseeable in it. Unless your kid is hoping to be a veterinarian, then maybe there are some things that are unseeable in it.
Have your kids read the book?
Oh yeah, they've both read it.
What message do you want your kids to get from the book?
Well, they've given it to me already that maybe we should have more oversight for people with wild ideas and unlimited resources.
Because, and the reason in some ways, so this is where I started to think about lately about The Eye Collector and how this book relates to The Eye Collector, which, they're very different books.
They couldn't be more different for you as a writer, I'd say.
Or visually or, in any sort of way. But one thing I think they kind of connect in is they both have these figures, these kind of, villainous, kind of antagonistic figures who really are trying to help. In their mind, they're just trying to, let's solve world hunger. What could be better than that? Well, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but, if you don't have the oversight,
That's right.
if you don't have
The road to hell.
Yeah, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That's a good way to put it. I feel like there's a thematic sort of idea there of like, despite the best intentions, if that tech billionaire maybe has a heart of gold, maybe I would maybe suspect not, but maybe, it's still not necessarily a good idea to give them all power.
Mm-hmm. There's a great and sinister moment where you realize that a parent in the story is literally playing favorites. That's the other thing that I really liked that came out of the writing process was we are just human and we do play favorites. And sometimes those playing favorites has almost no consequence, right? Oh, I prefer eating at this restaurant to that one. I prefer making this kind of meal for my family to that one. No consequence really in the grand scheme. But if suddenly you had unlimited resources, the favorites you're playing can have enormous consequences and tragedies.
And even if you have a good motivation driving what you're doing, you still just may not be thinking it through to the end for perhaps emotional reasons, as well.
Okay, 2 more. What moment during the production of the book gave you your largest sense of doubt?
Oh,
to me, it was the color tests, looking at the color tests and thinking, objectively, these people are all doing a great job, but I don't feel it's coming together and I don't know why.
For me, it was the biggest sense of doubt I had in the project actually was right at the finish line where I thought I loved the whole thing, and then I suddenly found myself despising the last line. And like it's the last moment, it's the last out, and it had never been my job to rewrite, to do any rewrites on it. And so I suggested a rewrite, and I was a little bit trepidatious of like what is going to happen. Yeah, I'm stepping out of my lane here to suggest. And both Matt and Jonathan were like, "Oh, cool, yeah, that's great. Let's do that, no problem." And I realized that I had been putting so much pressure on staying out of their business because I wanted them to stay out of mine. Like they had been giving me so much freedom as the art director to like make calls on certain things that I didn't want to step on any toes.
Well, the other, I think, backstory that you may not be aware of with that is the last like page and a half, 3-4 pages really, were ones where me and Scott had gone over them like 10 times, kind of almost being like, okay, can we do this in 2? Maybe we need 3, maybe we need 4. And then, me and Matt had
Like
kind
pages
of
you're
done
talking about, yeah.
pages. And then we'd kind of, when me and Scott had finally like proposed a better solution than what I had on the page, pacing wise, and in terms of how he storyboarded it out, what he's thinking. And I was like, yeah, no, that works. Because when I had turned it to him, I was like, I feel sometimes what I'll do in a script, and maybe this isn't fair, but sometimes what I'll do in a script is I'll get it to like a point of like, I feel like it's 90% there, but I don't know how to take it, the extra 10%. And I'll just let somebody else figure that out. I'll figure out, I'll get to the point where I'll be like, I just don't quite know how to solve this story problem, but I trust that somebody will solve this story problem at some point, whether it's me later or Scott drawing it or Gregory.
And when you're working in
out.
collaboration, so many of your efforts get undone in a good way by the
Yeah.
collaborations. So
And so then even after Scott had drawn it, there was a moment too where me and Matt were going back and forth where Matt was like, I don't know about these words. How about he had given me some revisions, and then I'd revised his revision, and then I'd had Lyndon like reletter it 3
So really what we're describing here, Lyndon, to answer your question, is an accident always happens a kilometer or 2 from home, right? We were right close to being finished, and then it was like, oh, are we really saying what we all wanted to say with the end?
And there was we had settled on I think an ending that it worked and we were happy with. But when you came in with that line, I think it kind of was just sort of like we'd all been kind of kicking around at trying to get this thing to work just a little bit better and not really getting 100% to where we wanted it to be. But we decided it was, it's 99%.
Yeah.
Let's just keep moving. So
Okay.
that's where
Good writing is
I
rewriting.
don't think you realize like we were kind of almost resigned to having a 95% solution. And so it was like, oh, great, 100% solution, So that's where we kind of were really happy to jump on. Oh, yes, yeah, he's figured it out.
Okay, so now say the book is, let's pretend this is a couple years down the road and the book has been successful. Potentially there have been interest for media rights on the project, and a studio comes around and they say, we want you to do the same thing a second time.
Well,
Not-
first things first. If a book is successful to me, it's because a young comics maker has showed up and said, this book gave me an idea for a book, and now I'm working on some comics.
I'm
That's where
purely
success
talking
is.
about the sense of someone has decided that this property is worth a bunch of money and they want more of the exact same thing.
Well, they can't really have it.
Yeah, I don't know how you could have it. I mean, in a situation like that, my policy is always like, sure, like let's sign up for it. And then I'll just give them what they think. I'll give them a thing that I want to do, and I'll make them think it's what they wanted.
Like what we did
That's
talk
my
about.
strategy always.
So sometimes when we were doing story breaks, and this is good related to that, because the company in question does have some penetration in the media sphere. So there's like a not 0% chance that could happen.
Yeah, whatever that means.
Whatever that means, right? If someone came and said, give us more of this, they could have more of that shape of story. Because how it started was, let's have a story that has a unrepentant main character, an emotional beat every chapter, an action beat every chapter, and a consequence that is either emotional or practical in everything. Like we could rebuild
Yeah, I mean, it's the
the
same
good parts
characters, but like
very easily.
people don't. I think when people get the idea that, oh, a company is going to make you just kind of rehash it, what I think often people forget is the company hiring you doesn't actually know what they're talking about. It's
J.J.
like you
Abrams
could
said this
hand them
best.
something totally different, 100% different, but you put like 5 things in it, which are the kind of things they actually cared about. It's like, oh, you gave them the same face mask, you gave them the same dog, but everything else is different. They don't even recognize it's different.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've been talking for an
Oh,
hour.
wait, I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
want to say one thing. TED Talk, J.J. Abrams is my favorite J.J. Abrams. And his TED Talk where he talks about how when people rip off Jaws, they rip off the wrong thing.
Right.
That's when people usually ask you to sequelize something. They're asking for more of the shark,
Right.
not recognizing that the human elements of Jaws are what make it good. And so if someone said, can you give us, Last Breeds 2, we could absolutely do that. But what we would do without telling them is
Without
we
telling
would,
them. That's the key.
Yeah.
The key thing.
we'd take the shark and we'd add all that other stuff in again.
The mistake people make in those rooms, like writers specifically make in those kind of scenarios, is they'll get the haggles up. They're like, well, I'm not just going to rehash the thing you said.
We've made those
tell
same
them,
mistakes.
hey, yeah, I'm happy to rehash it, and then you don't rehash it, and they don't know the difference.
Okay, we've been going for over an hour, and Dan's going to kill us, so we're going to wrap this one up. I've got one
we're
last
done.
question here. Gentlemen, a studio comes around and says, we're going to, I don't know, make a movie, make a series. You get to bring you can only bring one person from the team. Who gets it?
Who can you bring from the team
Who's
We're going to develop this property somewhere else.
in other media?
Yes, but we can only
Jonathan.
take one person.
It's Jonathan. They got to take Jonathan.
But are you saying like who's
From the-
going in the first place?
What do you mean?
So in this scenario,
like
I think I can
me and
frame this
Gregory are
properly.
going?
Gregor understands the question.
So I understand the question.
Question.
A production company has come and they've said, okay, we'll let somebody write the script or rewrite the script for television, for film, for a video game, whatever. Matt, as the creative, can license it. Jonathan, if they want the voice to match, it has to be Jonathan who understands how we synthesize the big idea into the character idea. So that's who I'd push for. Because they're not going to hire the art director over the writer to move a story into another medium.
Jonathan, do you feel comfortable saying that you have a grasp of the vision of the entire project, that you could do that?
I feel like I would be a good choice in that sense, but also in the sense that I would sneakily just get everything Gregory and Matt wanted into it.
We'd be inside the Trojan horse of your wooden mind. Yeah.
I feel like one of my talents is to know what to keep and what to kill, and to know how to get things past people.
Well, in a book all about what we kept and what we killed, Last Breeds, by the time you listen to this, should be available either from me exclusively at conventions, or Jonathan, or Gungnir Books, or widely distributed to comic stores everywhere. This has been Super Pulp Science, where Gregory has avoided a media checklist and got a podcast episode all at the same time. I'm encouraging you all to join the fight and make comics.